Because as people rise out of dire poverty, they change what they eat and how they live. As you become more affluent, you tend to change from a grain-based diet into an animal protein-based diet. And to cite just one statistic, it takes 17 times more water to raise a pound of beef than it does to grow a pound of corn. So all of those people joining the middle class will also be a drain on existing water resources. Now, I want to reflect on myself for a moment. I'll be talking about I'll be reflecting on the situation, but I left this meeting very concerned. Now, I go to a lot of meetings. I like hearing speakers. I read a lot of books and a lot of articles. And sometimes I think, oh, this is really extraordinary. I need to know more. But within a day or two, probably like all of us, within a day or two, you're on to the next thing, something with your children, something with your wife, something with your apartment. A light bulb has to be changed. Suddenly you're on to something else in life. So, yes. But for some reason, and I can't to this day figure out why, this grabbed me by the throat and has not let go. I left the meeting concerned, and I wanted to know more about the problem and solutions. I went back to my office, and I began reading, and I kept reading the next day, the next week, the next month. But here's the transformational moment. As I kept reading, I kept bumping into something that surprised me greatly, because it seemed that nearly every solution to water scarcity had either started in Israel or was one in which Israel had played a major part. And I found this puzzling because I thought that I knew more than a little bit about Israel. Israel is in the driest region in the world, the Middle East. The country gets rain only in a good year from October to April, but usually from November to March. And as you can see from this map, nearly two-thirds of the country is desert, and the rest of the country is semi-arid that, as I said, doesn't get much rain. And as I kept reading, I learned some other things that didn't make sense. Remember I said to you before that the intelligence officials said that climate change, population growth, and rising living standards would be among the reasons for this water scarcity? Well, Israel has suffered terribly from climate change. It gets now, on average, about 25% less rainfall each year than it did 30 years ago. And as for population, look at that growth chart. And as for population, Israel, since 1948, when Israel became an independent country, since 1948, Israel has had the fastest rate of population rise in the entire world, an 11-fold increase in population in that time period. And affluence, well, after Singapore and South Korea, Israel has had the fastest rate of economic growth of any nation in the world. And yet, in spite of all of this, as I learned, very dry Israel was not just getting by with its water supplies, but remarkably, it was water abundant. It was so abundant that it's able to provide 24/7 safe, healthy water for its entire population, something common in New York or London, but something that actually is enjoyed only by a minority of the world's population. Indeed, since we are in Panama, even with all the progress that this great country has made in recent years, the country still does not have universal access to drinking water or sanitation. But it goes beyond that in Israel. The country doesn't just have universal access to drinking water and sewage systems, there's much more. Although agriculture is very water intensive, the country is self-sufficient in fruit and vegetables. It even, it even exports billions of dollars a year of produce, something akin to exporting billions and billions and billions of liters of precious water every year. And on top of that, as the administrator said, Israel provides the Palestinian Authority with 60% of the water consumed by Palestinians in the West Bank. It also provides a significant amount of water to the Kingdom of Jordan. And even during periods of conflict, every single day, it provides drinking water to Gaza. So I wanted to know, how had Israel done all of this? I wanted to understand what Israel had done and how it had essentially rethought the notion, the idea of water itself. Because if the world is going into a period of water scarcity, it would be important for the world to have a model to copy. But indeed, as I learned and as I said earlier, it's relevant whether you have a lot of water or little water. So I went looking for a book. You know, you go into bookstores, it seems that there's a book on every topic in the entire world. So I assumed, of course, there had to have been a book written about Israel and water. But it turned out that there was not a single one. And then I figured, okay, well, there's obviously a book in Hebrew in Israel, and I'll find someone to get me that copy of that book, and I'll get somebody to translate it. But it turned out the book had never been written in Hebrew or in Israel either. And then I'm a busy businessman. I'm busy with life, like all of us. And my wife probably was not that happy when I came home that day, and I said, honey, I've got a really great idea. And she said, what's that? She's heard me say those words before, and usually it's uh-oh. So I said, I have a really great idea. I'm going to write a book. And she said, okay. And then she reminded me that we live on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. I don't know if any of you know what I mean by that, but we don't have a single friend who doesn't say that they're writing a book. So she assumed that I'm like with everybody else, the hundreds and hundreds of people we know, that everybody is writing a book, and she kind of assumed, and frankly, I even kind of assumed that that would probably go the same course. But indeed, I ended up writing a book. I spent a couple of years doing research and writing and rewriting, and when the book came out, it obviously touched a nerve. Within a, yeah, there it is, okay. Bestseller in the United States, making the bestseller lists of the New York Times, the LA Times, and the Washington Post. And the book is now out all around the world in many languages. So clearly, lots and lots of people are concerned about growing water scarcity and what to do about it. So now we talk, finally, about what Israel did do. How did Israel become nearly weather independent? And what can Panama and the world learn from Israel's experience, not just in combating water scarcity, but in reimagining the role of fresh water in meeting a country's drinking, sanitation, and, because of the canal, industrial needs. How did they do it? First, I mentioned earlier that Israel became a country in 1948, but even before there was a state, even while what is today Israel was governed by the British, the pre-state Zionist leaders developed a culture and an ethos that they would not allow water scarcity to slow their ability to grow and prosper. And that is of central importance. They decided that they would make three things essential: developing the ability to defend themselves by themselves, and today Israel has one of the greatest militaries in the world. Tiny Israel, a country of 9 million people, is on a par, not with the United States, but with par with other great world powers in terms of military. They decided as a second great existential choice to develop a great immigration system so they could welcome anybody, any Jew from anywhere in the world who wanted to come into the country. And today Israel's immigration system is a model for the world, and a large part of why Israel's large population growth that I pointed out before. But the third great existential choice they made in the 1930s was to put budgets and the best minds of the country to work on the water future of what they hoped would be their young country. And you know what? It's just like in our private lives. When you put attention to something, when you focus on something, when you tell your kids, do your homework and brush your teeth and get some sleep and do the right things and eat right, when you do the right things, it doesn't always turn out. Sometimes there is bad luck. But more often than not, when you focus on something and take good practices, you get good outcomes, and that was the case here. And I'd like to make this point. Culture leads to politics, and politics leads to policy. In this case, a smart culture resulted in smart policies. Now, during my research for Let There Be Water, I had the great honor of interviewing Israel's then president and Nobel Peace Prize laureate, the late Shimon Peres. And during my long interview with him, he was very kind with the amount of time he gave me. He said that the Jewish people in general, and Israelis in particular, were forever dissatisfied. He said he was referring to this in a way of some complaint because he said that this dissatisfaction was very bad for politicians, but he also said it by way of praise, saying it was very good for science, technology, and for progress. And this national culture can be confusing sometimes for visitors to Israel because it makes for a very frenetic place. Good enough is never good enough. People are always pushing for more. But I can also be appreciative of the fact that this culture and this personality exists. Beyond culture, but I can't emphasize it enough nonetheless if you haven't gotten the idea yet, unlike in many places where water is highly politicized, Israel has an apolitical, technocratic form of water governance. They have an administrative body called the Israel Water Authority, and the organization, devoid of politics, far away from politicians, focuses on the best use of water for the largest number of people, and this organization plans far, far ahead into the future. They just completed a 50-year model plan a few months ago. Now, with all due respect to Senator Juan Carlos Arango, who is here, and thank you. If you want to say hello to everybody, please feel free. Wave. You can say hello, everybody. A dear friend of mine. He has my vote in the next election, I promise. Okay. I don't know if I just lost half of the audience. I have no idea. Senator Arango notwithstanding, yes, okay, we're friends. Okay, good. Thanks for the. You want to come up with a hug and everything too? Okay. I would say that it is actually, as you think about the water future of Panama, it's actually, again, no disrespect, it is actually a very good idea to keep politicians as far away as possible from technocratic, oh boy, woo! I don't think anybody properly prepared me for that reaction. So okay, well, I'm glad you all agree. But in Israel, they understood this and they decided to separate it, and it has been a very large source because politicians are in the business of allocating resources of society, and they have to make choices of who are going to be the winners and who are going to be the losers. And inevitably, even with the best of intentions, what ends up happening all the time is they end up rewarding their friends, and they end up not rewarding those who are their opponents. When you turn it over to a technocratic body, you have the opportunity to have a better outcome. Okay, I want to talk about another matter now, which is peculiar, not just to Panama, but all over the world, and where Israel, once again, is a model. And that is, in much of the world, water is either subsidized or free. People actually pay very little or rarely pay the real price for their water. But in Israel, they know that market forces work very well to encourage conservation, efficiency, and innovation. And in Israel, there is not one single penny of government subsidy for the water that people use, whether they're farmers or industrialists or home dwellers. And whether for infrastructure, administration, or pumping water to their homes, the full cost of water is paid for by the public. And I pause to tell you something else. When Israel was about 5 years old as a country, they began, and I don't want to go into this now at length, but maybe during the Q&A we can. When Israel was about 5 years old as a country, they began passing a series of essential water laws. And one was a curious one, which I write about in my book, and I won't go into too much detail here. And it was called the National Water Metering Law. Now, this is long before the era of computers, obviously before big data. There was no such reason to do this at the time, but they passed a law that said that no water can pass from point A to point B without going through a water meter. And they have rooms, huge warehouses full of cards with all the data, home by home, farm by farm, as to what people were using. And when I interviewed for the book some of these now very aged people, why did you do this? He said, the three men who I interviewed said to me that we understood that we would need to understand people's usage patterns. This wasn't so that we could charge them. We wanted to understand usage patterns, and with understanding usage patterns, we'd be able to design a better water future. And it's a very interesting thing for a country like Panama, where water metering is, not an everyday event. Okay, so there's another feature about why it's good to charge for water, and that is because in Israel, because it also save money. And this has led to Israel having one of the very best national water infrastructure systems in the world, with very little water lost to leaks. In some parts of the world, water losses are as much as 65% of the water that has been cleaned and transported, ready to be put through your pipes. Now, if you want to affect climate change, think about this. It's extremely expensive to transport water. It's expensive to clean water. It's very energy intensive to do this. You put it into your pipes, and then you lose 65% of it. That's basically burning off coal and oil and natural gas, because very little of this is done with renewable resources, and that could be a major contributor to reducing carbon fuels around the world. By the way, the reason countries do this, they're not dumb, because they've made the conclusion that it's actually cheaper for them to let the pipes leak than to fix their water systems. Now, Panama does not have a 65% water loss factor, but according to a recent report that I read in preparing for this speech, the areas, it is also true in water tech innovation. So whether in infrastructure planning or leak minimization or water security or irrigation agriculture, Israel excels in each of these areas of water technology innovation. And I'd like to share with you a handful of examples. First, since agriculture is the largest user of water nearly everywhere, people don't realize how consumptive agriculture is. It uses between 95% and 50%, half to 95% of nearly every country's water resources goes to agriculture. And therefore, if you can find ways to maximize every drop in the farm and the field, it is especially important. So fittingly, it was in Israel that drip irrigation was invented. Now, this is not an Israeli field. This is not also a Panamanian field. This is in Asia, actually. This is a flood-irrigated field. And for those of you who are not from agriculture, what you can see is going on is it's rows of crops side by side with little trenches, with little furrows, and those furrows are regularly flooded. And the roots get what they can get of the water, and then the water evaporates, and then the field is flooded yet again. This is how it was done in ancient Egypt, by the way, 5,000 years ago. And even in dry places around the world, crops are irrigated by flooding them or sometimes by using sprinklers, both of which lead to evaporation, sometimes losing, believe it or not, as much as 80% of the water used. Again, a catastrophic, needless loss of water. But with an Israeli invention called drip irrigation, tiny drippers feed droplets of water to plants at their roots, and it results in close to zero water lost to evaporation. Now, this picture that I have here shows a dripper line, and right there you can see the driplet of water falling on this young plant. Instead of irrigating the entire field, it's irrigating actually only an area of about 2 or 3 inches around the plant. What I couldn't show you, because there would be no visual of interest, is that this is only one kind of drip irrigation. The other kind is called subterranean drip irrigation, which is planted 4 inches below the soil surface. And in that situation here, about 2% of the water is lost to evaporation. With subterranean drip irrigation, 0 is lost. Aside from drip irrigation, Israel is also a world center of innovation in seeds. And it's a sad story of how this came about. I don't have time to tell it to you, but I would love to share it with you sometime. But because of adversity and crisis and terrible bad thinking by one of Israel's neighbors, Israel was forced into the business of developing seeds. This began in the 1930s, and Israel quickly became a global center of seed innovation. Israeli scientists have developed non-GMO, drought-resistant seeds, and that seems paradoxical. How do you grow a crop without adequate amounts of water? But these scientists figured out a way to grow crops that can be grown with poor quality water, like brackish water, high salty water, not seawater, but salty water. And that allows large amounts of the natural water resources of the country to be saved, because if 50 to 95% of your water is being used for agriculture, you want to find a way of using as little high quality water as possible. And in addition to that, Israel's seed scientists also figured out a way to not only have drought-resistant crops, but also to develop a way to focus only on that part of the plant that will be harvested. Since it requires a lot of water to grow all parts of the plant, these scientists use traditional breeding techniques, non-GMO techniques, to come up with tomato plants. See these tomato plants? What's unusual about them? No leaves. There's no leaves on these tomato plants. If any of you have ever grown tomatoes, you know that tomatoes usually are a couple of tomatoes around a large number of leaves. Tomato plants have extremely long roots. These roots only go down a few inches. And that was a choice made, because why waste water on growing parts of the crop that you'll never use? Now, there's also some highly technological uses of Israeli innovation. I'd like to share two of them with you, and then I would like to wrap up. In 1952, when Israel was then only 4 years old, bankrupt, and deeply focused on security, the War of Independence was still not quite over. Raids from Arab neighbors continued. They were busy absorbing millions, what became millions of immigrants. Even so, because I said earlier, the country focused on this as an existential issue. Even so, the country's leaders decided to look far, far into the future and to pursue a new source of water. They decided that they would capture all of the country's sewage, yuck, and treat it to an ultra-high pure level. Now, let me make sure we all know what I'm talking about here. We're talking about sewage. Now, what is sewage? Sewage is the stuff that goes down your shower or your bath, your kitchen sink, your bathroom sink. You have a dishwasher or washing machine, your dishwasher or washing machine. And one last thing, it's what goes down your toilet. So I don't know about you. We call it in America the yuck factor. I don't really have a keen desire to be drinking. I like my next-door neighbor, but I'm really not that close with her. So they understood that, and they said, okay, well, people don't want to drink it. We can make it pure enough to drink, but people aren't going to want to do that. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to purify the water nonetheless, and then we're going to build out a parallel national water infrastructure system that will bring this specially treated water to farms all over the country. And this is being done now via special pipes, and water is used to grow appropriate crops. And just think about that. A person in Tel Aviv goes to the supermarket and buys a tomato, delicious tomato, they have it with dinner. Depending upon their age, 45 minutes later, a couple of hours later, you know, nature calls, so to speak, and they do what they have to do. Biology at work. And some period of time later, that water is purified. It is shipped to a farm somewhere else, and a year or two later, that same person comes home, sits down to dinner, and says, "Don't I know you from somewhere?" And this is a wonderful opportunity to think about the fact that we waste enormous amounts of water through our sewage systems. And this is an opportunity to reuse sewage again and again and again with hardly any water lost. Today, not surprisingly, Israel by far leads the world in the reuse of treated sewage, treating just about all of its sewage and reusing about 90% of it for agriculture. And we're going to see more and more of this in an ever drier world, and I think Israel will be an inspiration for that. Now, the last technology I'd like to talk about is something that, when it was first thought of, was purely science fiction. Also in the 1950s, Israel's founders and leaders began speaking about this great idea. Remember that picture of the map with the desert, two-thirds of the country desert? Well, they had this great idea, what if we could make the desert bloom? And the way they would do that, of course, was in part by getting that treated sewage, but they had another idea. They said maybe we could make the desert bloom by a phrase they used called desalting the sea. Desalting the sea, which in the 1950s, I tell you, was pure science fiction. Now, of course, it's an everyday event, but at that time, no one thought it was possible. It became what is now known as desalination. And today, Israel uses the approximate equivalent of 80% of all of the household drinking water that is consumed in Israel comes from Mediterranean desalination water plants. Fittingly, the world's largest and most productive energy-efficient desalination plant is located in Israel, and pictured here is the Sorek desalination plant, the largest plant in the entire world. And what you may not know, if I had time, I would do a quiz with the audience. What's not visible in this picture? Anybody want to quickly say what's not visible in this picture? What's that? The sea, right? Sea, right. You'd think a desalination plant should be on the water. This plant is so sophisticated that it's actually 3 kilometers from the Mediterranean, because the Israeli planners decided that waterfront property was too valuable to use for an industrial plant. So they planted this 3 kilometers back, and again, not for now, time doesn't permit, to explain how they actually figured out how to bring it and to go underneath all the real estate development that was there. It's really quite extraordinary. But this desalination plant is truly a model for the world. Okay, I'd like to, there we go. In my book, I describe how Israel's culture, governance, and embrace of technology led to its water independence. But before I conclude, I'd like to share something else with you, because perhaps some of you have heard, let me just see a show of hands, how many of you have ever heard the expression that the wars of the 21st century will be fought over water? Anybody heard that? Oh my, almost, okay, at least half, maybe 2/3 of you. Okay. Supposedly the wars of the last century were fought over energy, and the wars of the 21st century, they say, will be fought over water. So I write in my book about what I call hydro diplomacy, and how water and water technology can be used to open doors and build relationships. For example, here's a picture of Prime Minister Netanyahu with the Premier of China, with an honor guard in China. It was in large part because of China's fascination with Israeli water technology, and if you don't know this, China has enormous, enormous water problems. But China decided to abandon its support for the Arab League boycott of Israel in the 1980s, and to reach out to Israel to send over the country's leading hydrologists. Within a year of that exchange of these professionals from Israel to China, China makes the decision, and I write about this in my book, the first time it was ever reported in any language, China makes the decision that they are going to open up formal and public diplomatic relations with Israel. This story can be told again and again, and Israel establishing ties. We all know that water can lead to conflict. We have seen that again and again, but Israel has also demonstrated that water can be a source, not of conflict, but of conflict resolution. Water can put countries on a pathway to coexistence, cooperation, and perhaps sometimes even peace. And so when people say that the wars of the 21st century will be fought over water, you know, they may be correct, but there is another pathway too. My friends, civilization was transformed when humankind learned how to grow food. People no longer needed to be rooted in one place. People no longer needed to be nomads, and they no longer needed, and people then could be rooted in a single place. Instead of traveling to where the food was, people could stay where they were. They could build cities, and from that, civilization grew. And they could do that because they had all the food they could need. Similarly, where once people had to go to where the water was, it is now possible to develop all of the water resources anyone needs. Israel today produces two-thirds of the water it uses for homes, businesses, and farms. Now again, for those who don't read English, this is the natural water of Israel. This is the lake, the one and only lake where Jesus walked, the Sea of Galilee. This is the natural water from aquifers and from a few rivers, and mostly from the Sea of Galilee. This is desalinated water. This is the treated wastewater in terms of the total national usage and other mechanical devices used. So just think of that. Two-thirds of the nation's water comes from artificial means. Only one-third comes from natural sources like a lake, a river, or an aquifer. But here's the amazing news. If Israel needed to do so today, it could produce all of the water it needed and rely upon none of the water from nature. As with the rise of agriculture, this could transform civilization everywhere, with humanity no longer being dependent upon the whims of nature. There is an important lesson in all of this for Panama and for every nation. Whether a rich country or a poor country, a large one or a small one, a landlocked one or one with one or even two long seacoasts, whether a country with little water like Israel or, generally speaking, abundant water resources like Panama, I hope I've convinced everyone here that every country has something to learn from the Israel experience with water. The world doesn't need to invent a brand new approach. Of course, dry countries everywhere can learn from what Israel did in becoming water abundant and drought-proof, but the greater lesson, a lesson for both wet and dry countries, and the message I leave you with today is that water problems that have plagued humanity since the time of the pharaohs actually need not be problems at all. They can be opportunities. You may all sense, and you'd be correct, that I admire Israel and the Israelis. But in my many trips to the country and my hundreds of interviews with Israelis, I haven't met a single Superman or Superwoman. Everything that Israel did for itself, Panama and every other country can do too. Panama has done some amazing things, particularly in the last few decades, and as Panama looks to continue its remarkable progress and development, there is no water problem facing this country that can't be fixed with existing and known technology. Every single country has the ability to control its water destiny. The challenge is to want to do it and to focus society's resources and attention on getting it done. But the good news is it can be done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Siegel. Let's start the Q&A. And these are the rules, okay? You'll see personnel with pens and paper. Please write down the question and write down your name, please, where you work, who you represent. The questions you can ask in English or Spanish, it doesn't matter. Even Dr. Seth, Mr. Quijano will be with him, and the Vice President is there also. Engineer Carlos Vargas is also with them. Please lift up your hand so that the personnel can pass out the paper and pens for you. Over here on the right, over here on the left. And we will give the panelists your questions so that they can answer anything that you want. Let's watch 2 videos while we get the questions, okay? If possible, Mr. Producer, could you please? Without water, water won't last everything. In 2012, the loss of water was projected 13 years beforehand. Imagine if you had a jar of water, but every day more people drink from that same jar. So you need more and more jars to be able to offer water to everybody. Ensure the water for tomorrow is the challenge today. If we're not conscious of the proper use of water, its impact will bring us consequences. The lacking of drinkable water can cause problems, like a drought that could destroy crops, animals, and many important species of animals, including human beings. It could even kill the planet. So ensure tomorrow's water is the challenge today.
Gracias.
Thank you. That's the campaign that you see in all the media and the social media. That is done by Professor Lagos or Professor Lakes. He's around here somewhere. Now with us, Honorable Senator Elias Castillo from the National Assembly. He's part of the board of directors of the Panama Canal, and Julia Guardia, technical secretary of the National Council for Water. It's called CONAGUA. She is with us here today. Do we have any questions? Yes, we do. If you could please pass up the questions. It's in English. The question is in English.
Hi. Can you hear me now like this? I don't know if I'm using this or this. Can you hear me like that? Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'll shut that off then. So we have a question from Enrique Tejera, ACP. How much is the cost of desalination and how that compares with water potable processes? Okay, so desalinated water is more expensive than other forms of water. The cheapest of water that you can get is just taking it out of a river or out of a lake. And then the pumping cost is about, call it about 6 or 7 cents for just under 300 gallons. Desalination is currently costs about 52 cents for that same about 300 gallons. But that price continues to drop. And I'd like to indicate the reason for that lower price, just a historical model. When Israel built its very first desalination plant in the 1960s as an experimental center, the cost was $14 for that same about 300 gallons. And they continued to work on a whole bunch of different ways of bringing the cost down. And the cost of this technology continues to drop. But the guess is that it won't drop much below 40 cents for what's a cubic meter, 286 gallons. I'd like to make one other point, though I've answered the question. The important thing to understand is that desalination should never be what a society should use as its first source of water. It should be used as an insurance policy for a society. It should be there in place for times of drought, for times of scarcity. And also, we didn't talk about this much today, but if anybody here cares about the environment, and I hope most or all of you do, overpumping resources, overpumping aquifers is extremely bad for the soil, it's bad for nature, it's bad for the ecology. And what is valuable is in times of drought to allow the aquifer to recharge or to not be further depleted. And so the value of desalination is to use it as an insurance policy for times when you need it, but when you don't need it, to be flexible and to take as much out of nature as you can, because that is the cheapest form. I didn't say this in my remarks earlier, last thing I'll say, and that is that desalinated water is not just more expensive, but it is also exceptionally clean. It is the healthiest water you can possibly be drinking, because the water you get from natural resources tends to have contaminants of all kinds. I have a book coming out this coming October, and the book is about this topic, that the drinking water we have, I think it's the next great challenge we have in the Western world, is that our water is contaminated with all kinds of pharmaceutical products and chemicals, and we are drinking that in very tiny quantities, and it's affecting our bodies, our hormonal systems, and creating problems for ourselves, our children, and so forth. So desalinated water maybe end up becoming a solution for not just drought situations, but also as a solution of fixing what is will be seen in ever coming years as an ever greater problem about micro-contamination of drinking water.
This is your next one, but I'll go now.
Here's a question here. Are you planning within the National Hydric Plan the reparation of the principal leak of the city? Unfortunately, I don't have my legal representative here, but what I can transmit is the information that we know up until now of the meetings that we've had with Conagua, for example. We understand that right now there's an investment of around $250 million in what would be the reparation of that leak, of those leaks. I think there are other experts that have given us that are here that could maybe be more concise on that topic. And one of the presentations that I've given in the past is that perhaps if we control the leaks through reparations or renewals or any type of distribution, we could possibly save ourselves the investment in additional water treatment plants to supply what we're losing through filtration. And it's an effort that in repairing those things that have been damaged due to construction or other reasons, but there are some, and there are many systems of plumbing that are past due. They're old. They've been there for decades, and it's time to their useful life has ended, and we have to replace them. So the plan, we recognize the plan, but we know that there's a contract right now with the company, so that can be of assistance. I think it's a $65 million contract to create the plan to offer a solution to this problem. It's a problem of more of a governmental problem, not a canal problem, but yes, we are worried about it and we are aware of it. Okay? Good morning, good day. I have a question. What initiatives do you have in Panama do you suggest so that the three key components of the speaker can be implemented effectively? Like we've heard before, the key components of the conference are culture, governance, and technology. That's where Israel was effective. In terms of culture, I would have to say I'm going to throw the ball back to we have to feel it. We have to respect it. Respect the environment. So each one of us has to be the promoter of that culture, that new culture of conservation of this hydric resource. Obviously, in the program of Conagua, but definitely it all depends on us, right? In terms of governance, there is a chapter in the national plan that's dealing with that issue. We are trying to do some consulting with the World Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank, but listening to the governance in Israel was a success because they placed their best minds at the service of water, and that was complete and absolutely depoliticized. Politicians or politics was put on the side. It was independent, professional, that give that resource, that water resource value, and that reflects the right signs of the marketplace to be able to save water consciously. And finally, technology. Here we are here to inspire how different methods could take us and help us. Obviously, not necessarily do we have to use exactly the same desalination plants that we heard today, but certainly people that live in Taboga, or people that live in Coronado, or people that live in the archipelagos and the island of Colon and on the beaches in the Pacific area, they could be thinking of alternatives like this, independently of the technology. The National Plan of Hydric Security, CONAGUA, and the authority of the Panama Canal, what they have proposed is the development of multi-purpose reservoirs on the Villa de Indio, principally. Engineer Vargas, please.
That's right.
The question. Okay. I'd like to just say...
They see us here all the time, so
you're
the new guy.
I'd like to say a word. I think you gave a very important answer. But I want to, if I can, I want to push your comment a little bit, and I want to push the audience a little bit. Because I think I think it is true that it's on all of us as citizens to push and demand more and better, but I also think it's unfair. Because we as citizens, now I'm an author, I'm a community activist, I have a stage, I have a platform, I get people to speak to, but all of us assume and delegate in a democratic system, which is what we have. We delegate to others the idea that they are going to take responsibility. We delegate to our elected officials that they are going to take leadership on these issues. But the reality is, elected officials are usually, unless there's a big opportunity for to challenge an incumbent, what ordinarily happens is elected officials are the last ones to adopt a new idea. Elected officials are actually concerned about being too far ahead of everybody else. And therefore, I think that what we need to say to ourselves is that we need civil society, which we didn't talk about earlier. We need civil society. We need, in the old days, it would be the church. Today, it would be corporations and the media. And I would say that with your corporation being probably the single most important employer in terms of national economy of Panama, this company can play an absolutely essential part in educating the media and educating other business leaders, and that I'm going to guess that change will come, but I think change will come faster if there's a concerted effort. And to say to everybody here, this was a great day. You had an incredibly great speaker. He was amazing. Okay. And I wish I could invite him home for dinner tonight, but of course, But aside from kidding around about it, that it's unfair to put it on each of us separately to say, each of us need to do something. I think what we need to do is we need to do something. We need to coalesce around a body of ideas and someone who will say, I will take the leadership in this. And I mean, it's a little bit unfair because you've been very generous and you've made me a guest here, and I love you both, and everyone has been wonderful. But I also want to push you to take this and not just make this a March 22nd event. We shouldn't just make this World Water Day. Every day should be a water day.
Gracias, Dr. Seth.
Thank you.
Let me just add something.
Permítame añadir una cosa. ¿Tenía otra pregunta? Sí, mi pregunta, sí, otra pregunta, sí.
It's from Daphne, either Chu or Chen.
Chen, Daphne Chen.
Chen, okay, Daphne Chen, and it says ACP.
She probably has the answer, but
what's that?
Go ahead.
Okay,
No,
you will know. Okay, Daphne Chen. And she asks, the world's largest lakes, rivers, and water reservoirs are drying out. What can be done in these countries to bring the water to normal levels, back to normal levels? Okay, this is among the most, Daphne, I don't know where you are, but this is, thank you, hi. This is among the most important questions that anyone can be asking. And it is of most significance, by the way, if you look around the world map and you say to yourself, where is it that these rivers and lakes are drying out? Where is that most particularly happening? It's happening everywhere. I mean, in America, the Great Salt Lake is drying out. In Israel, the Dead Sea is drying out. But where is it most significantly happening with grievous environmental consequences? It is happening in authoritarian and totalitarian countries. And there is a direct correlation between democratic institutions and the need for elected officials to be responsive to their publics and environmental degradation. It's no coincidence. It's no coincidence that in the years of Soviet rule in Eastern Europe, the environment was always in last place. It's no coincidence that in authoritarian countries like China, there is severe environmental problems. And the reason is because the governments need to deliver to the people the best economic results possible, and they don't look to the environment because the environment is 10 years from now, and those dictators and authoritarian leaders have no idea if they will still be in power. They hope to be, but they don't know, and they need to worry about today. And probably there's no case in the world more severe, and I'll get to the specifics of your question, what we can do, but there's no case in the world probably more severe than the nation of Iran. And of those of you who follow the news, you know that Iran, is trying to build a nuclear weapon, threatening Israel and its neighbors every day, spending untold billions and billions of dollars doing this terrible destabilizing work. But what is also happening for the since 1989, and I'm writing an article about this, what has happened since 1989 is that Iran has begun damming rivers and pushing them in a new direction, sending the water to places where there were supporters of the regime and depriving antagonists of the regime. And little by little, rivers have dried out, aquifers have dried out, whole lakes have dried out, and it's a grievous problem, but most particularly in the case of dictatorships. For the rest of the world, and so the answer there is you have to help those people throw off these bad leaders. In the rest of the world, and we are blessed, that Panama's democracy, we are blessed that America's democracy. I know that there's the ambassador and the ambassadorial staff of Israel is here. You can hold your hands up for a second. Thank you. Thank you so much. We are blessed that these are democracies that are responsive. In the rest of the world, here's what needs to be done. I spoke of it earlier. We need to start thinking about water in a holistic, multifaceted way. You need to not think of aquifers as an endless resource because they are not. Lakes are not an endless resource. They are not. They can dry out. They can get below a level of danger. And so what we need to be doing is using technology, using consumer education, using smart agriculture, and so in rainy years allow the aquifers and the lakes to recharge. We know that one of the things we should be talking about in Panama is storage capacity. It's obviously probably as great an issue as any this country faces. But use your good years to build storage capacity and hold on to that extra water that comes as a gift. And then in the bad years, don't overtake
of energy. In most cases, has a relative, which is emissions. And anything that we can do to mitigate the use of energy will help the environment, will help slow down climate change. So using vehicles that are electric vehicles, or using vehicles that consume less definitely will give out less emissions and therefore, in essence, reduce the effect on climate change. Now, we in the canal, we are very concerned about also the ships that go through the Panama Canal. These ships are consuming a lot of energy as they come in and they go through and transit. And throughout this long haul, they are consuming quite a bit of bunker, especially now before 2020, not using the cleanest fuels at all. But 2020, IMO, and we just finished this week a two-day Congress here, basically, of Panama Maritime, where some of the issues particularly were the implementation of the 2020 restrictions on heavy fuel oil. I think that's a step in the right direction. That is something that needs to be done, not only because Panama will also benefit from it because of the emissions of vessels that go through the canal and through Panama. Fortunately, it's only 50 miles, so it's a short run. but we are also contributing by, is contributing by being the shortest route between the east coast of the United States, which is really our best route from Asia and back. And consequently, any ship that actually uses the shortest route will also contribute to lesser emissions. We are marketing that. We are marketing through recognition, giving them points for low emissions or more efficient vessels. Now we have customers of ours that look at that list that we publish and they say, hey, why our ships are not there? Why are we so low in the rankings? And they're concerned now about actually saving fuel by having ships that are more efficient and by using the Panama Canal route, which is significantly shorter, saving anywhere between 6 to 9 days of emissions, and that has a real impact on the world. So somehow we're pushing in that direction, trying to, those that use the Cape of Good Hope, maybe even though it may cost a little bit more going through the Panama Canal because of charter rates and fuel costs at this point in time, they have to make an effort to actually also save on emissions. And I think IMO has taken a great step and a great risk in making 2020 a reality. So I think from a water management perspective, the canal has to definitely, especially through the dry season like we have right now, have to manage the resources, and we never think of anything else but the people that need the water first, and then to see if we have enough water for the vessels to go through. Fortunately, we do have enough water now. It is still a very dry summer, and it's going down rapidly. But we are managing it as well as we can. We have a group that does that. Actually, the water management guy is here, and he's the one that is monitoring on a daily basis, almost on an hourly basis, how water consumption is going and what things we need to do to improve the processes that could, in any event, save water, save energy, and also help slow down climate change.
Gracias, señor administrador. Ingeniero Vargas, la siguiente.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. Mr. Vargas.
Gota el agua se agota, we should learn a new one. Ni una gota al mar.
Aviso, el transubterráneo es peligroso.
Ni una gota al mar.
Ni una gota al mar.
We should maintain, hold the water in the multipurpose
I know we spent the
reservoirs.
afternoon together, so you'll write it down on a card and I'll memorize it, okay?
Gracias a la Fundación.
Thanks to the Casa Taller Foundation, which has sent a question here, and it says, if the key is water culture, what is the ACP's strategy now that it has an environmental educational culture program? What is the budget for environmental culture? What is the priority in education and culture? I am proud of the fact that now, with the management of the watershed of the Panama Canal, Panamanian people, we have created, within the Panama Canal structure, we have created the environmental division. That did not exist in the 85 years of U.S. administration, because it turns out that we perfectly understand that the water for the canal and the water that the 2 million people use through the 9 potabilization plants that bring water from the Chagres River through the Gatun and Arajuela lakes, well, we need to preserve it at all costs. And we spare no efforts in programs for environmental education. We work together with the Ministry of Education, Meduca, and the Environmental Ministry, focused basically, and this is our priority, focused on the children living around the watershed. We visit, we call on them, we have programs for guardians of the watershed in different schools, in the primary schools, around the watershed of the Panama Canal. We have joint activities with private companies such as Junior Achievement, where we get bags for entrepreneurs so that those children living around the watershed will learn how to perform jobs and tasks that will be environmentally friendly. We educate them in that sense. We have another program called NUCA, which is managed by volunteers of the Panama Canal Authority in their free time, in their spare time, who go and they are teachers for these children, teaching them the importance of the natural resource, the natural capital, caring for water, preserving water, and at the same time to act within sustainably responsible manners, always caring for the environment and always bearing in mind the people. So those are the environmental education priorities for our children in the Panama Canal watershed. Dr. Seth?
Coronado asks, hi Seth, hi Romy. You mentioned that water culture, I assume you mean in Israel, could you please explain how the people of Israel got involved in really appreciating the value of water? Great question. I'd like to start my answer by telling you what is not the case. I will tell you what is the case, but I want to start my answer importantly by telling you what is not the case. And what is not the case is what people say sometimes, which is, well, Israel had no choice. They have a lot of people, they have a dry climate, they had no choice. But that is not true, because other places had no choice, and the choice they made was to allow the environment to suffer, one, or they made the choice to not have water flowing to their citizens, or they made the choice not to have a robust agricultural sector. Those are choices also. And in fact, as I said in my remarks, that the vast majority of the world, except for Japan, most of the United States, and Western Europe, either you're out of luck or you have to go ahead and call a water company and buy water at an exceptionally high price. So it is one thing we should just banish from our thinking is the idea of no choice, because there was a choice. And here's what they did. They did lots of little things, and they did lots of big things. The big thing they did, again, I alluded to in my speech, they made water as essential to the future of the country as having a good army. They understand that they live in a very dangerous neighborhood, so to speak, and therefore they needed to know that they would always be smarter than their enemies. And the thinking was, the enemies can lose once, twice, 3, 5, 10, 20 times. But if Israel is wrong only once, they will lose and they'll be wiped out. So they said, we're going to build this great military. And it's similar in water. They made the decision, they didn't have to, but they made the decision that their water future is tied inextricably to the future of their happiness, their societal stability, and what turned out to be a phenomenally strong economy. Now, how do they do it? Well, there are 100 little things. I can give you a couple of examples. Children, when they begin nursery school at the grade of 3, they begin hearing all kinds of things that they should be doing. Like, for example, in America, when I was in nursery school, in kindergarten, they would sing on rainy days. We'd sing, and I don't sing, but we'd sing song in a nursery rhyme, rain, rain, go away, come again some other day. Rain was a problem. In Israel, when you're 3 years old, you learn a song, and I won't sing it again, but translate it as, it's raining outside, clap our hands, drip, drop, clap our hands. It shows an appreciation from the first moment for the idea of this. Children are taught at the age of 4, the year after that, how to properly brush their teeth. That's done in schools all over the world. But one part of this is how you turn on the water, how you turn off the water. And children are told in school, bring this home, tell this to your mommy, tell this to your daddy, tell this to your sister and brother. It's constantly reinforcing. Plus, public education. If you have gato el agua te agato, here, only... only in times of El Nino drought. Hey, you know, I'll take it wherever I can get it. In times of El Nino drought in Israel, in good times and bad times, there are signs everywhere that say, translating it generally, it is a pity, it is a shame, it is a disgrace to waste even a single drop. And so I mentioned that, and the administrator mentioned in the interview that I interviewed over 220 people for my book, 180 Israelis, 20 Palestinians, and 20 U.S. government officials. What was so interesting to me is that one of them was the head of a water utility in a suburb of Tel Aviv, who told me that if ever there is if someone is watering their lawn and the sprinkler is sprinkling so that it's going on the sidewalk, he gets a phone call at home at night saying, go to such and such street, so-and-so is wasting water. And so that mindset where everybody sees themselves as being socially responsible for this, that leads to people saying, I'm happy to spend society's money, public tax dollars, to put technology in place so that we know about this. And this keeps going. I mean, as I said, there are hundreds of examples, and I don't want to keep going and going. One last thing. We talked earlier that there's very little water metering here in Panama. In Israel, I mentioned it's everywhere, but it's even more than that. The water meters in most of the country are actually cell phones. And every few minutes, it doesn't fall and say, hi, Chaim is wasting water, nothing like that. But what it does do is that every few minutes, it sends an impulse talking about how much water is being used there. And it's done on a statistical model. If any of you have ever gone into a store and bought something that's expensive or unlike something you've bought before, sometimes they'll stop and they say, the credit card company wants to talk to you for a second. That's called anomaly research. It's an anomaly. I don't usually buy a fur coat. I don't usually buy expensive boots. So they want to make sure it's me. Well, they use the exact same technology in these homes. If suddenly the home is using water in a way that they don't usually use it on Tuesdays at 4:10 in the afternoon, it could mean that they're filling up a pot, but it could also mean that they have a leak. And so somebody is contacted and said, are you doing anything unusual in your home? And if so, fine. If not, we're sending out a crew to find the leak and to stop it. So you do all those types of things, and that gets you to a mindset where everybody sees it as their responsibility, and then it's just as natural can be that everybody understands the business opportunity. And I didn't talk about this at all, but Israel's turned this into a mega-billion-dollar export industry. So there's a virtuous circle of this. You save water, you have everyone involved, the ecology is better, the environment is better, people are making money, people feel they're part of something larger than themselves, people are part of a society, and it just keeps going on, and it's all to the good.
I have a question that is really for both of us. Seth, I'll send you your part here, but it's basically the same question. But let me start on my side. This comes from the Dutch embassy in Panama, middle half. And as a country that is active in the water sector in Panama for many years, I've been active, years, we know about the challenges Panama faces. What, according to you, should be the priority? From our perspective, from the canal perspective, of course, and by the fact that we consume so much water for the business that we have to attack it from the two main consumers. The main one is the canal itself. So if the canal has already done everything it can to limit the amount of water that it can consume per transit, then we need to look for other sources of water, because there are. It's just a matter, like he said, the water is going to sea very quickly. We are a very slim country, so drop goes in and within minutes it's down in the Caribbean or is down in the Pacific. Except if it's the Chagres. Chagres takes a long time to get there because it's a long river. But, so from one perspective is, our strategy has to be, we need more reservoirs. And yes, we've been talking about Rio Indio, but I think eventually, if this continues on, this climate change gets even more severe, which it looks like it's going to happen. I think even Rio Indio is not going to be enough, even Bayano may not be enough for a growing population. So if we could want to continue to grow, we need to plan to have enough water for these future generations. And the other way that we need to also attack the problem is from the consumption side of the human element. And of course, we consume a lot of water, and you see it. I mean, I'm sure that if I go to Israel, I will not see anybody washing their car with potable drinking water.
Not a chance.
Okay? So we need to also have a strategy in the laws, and we have some diputados here. We have to have some laws that in the future, you don't have to do it today, but you could actually start developing strategies so that you have a dual water system where you can have both the one that has not been processed and the one that has been processed for drinking water, so that you can flush your toilets. I know that I was talking to the lady previously in charge of the plant that is doing this sewage treatment plant, treatment for disposal later to the sea, and she says, we're actually going to be pumping out 90 million gallons per day of water that you could actually drink, and they're going into the river that's going to sea. So if we could imagine, if we could get that water and start using it for maybe agricultural or for toilets in these new areas where you're building houses and so on, there we could be tackling the problem as well. And there's another thing is, unfortunately, there's a lot of people are actually tapping into the system and are not paying for it, or paying too little for it. I mean, Panama has one of the lowest costs of water. And we have a saying in Spanish, lo que no nos cuesta,
what we do not pay for, let's party it out.
So I think and of course we have to repair all of those the water that's flowing into broken pipes and then it's just going into the ground. We have to tackle it from many, and we have, the good thing about this is we have a map of opportunities to make it better, because we got such a serious problem. So we are in time, but we do not have all of the time in the world for the next generation to cure the problem. It is this generation that has to do it, otherwise the next generations of Panamanians will be starving from water, even though we have all of the water in the world here in Panama.
I'd like to just say, I've given an answer and I'll answer them, but I wanted just again to reflect on your comment. You said that no one in Israel would wash their car with fresh water, potable water, but it's not, I mean, probably wouldn't, but the reason is not because it's against the law. It's not. And I don't actually agree with the idea necessarily that you should prohibit people from using fresh water, but people should pay the real price. People should pay the real price for their water. Now, I've got a funny feeling that just gave you a very sick feeling. I'm speaking to the senator here. Because, yes, you. Because, no, he says good. Because politicians very rarely like to say to people, oh, good, you'll pay more for something, right? Because people think of it as taxes, and no one likes taxes. And that's part of my last answer, is the culture. People pay the extra water fees. They don't love it, but they understand why they're paying it. And when you develop this holistic approach, when you start explaining to people and educating them and treating them like adults, they can do what they can do. The key part of washing the car is that everybody pays the full price for their water. And once you go above a certain threshold, you pay a penalty fee for your water. Because the idea is that you're consuming more than a reasonable amount. Well, that's fine. Don't ban it. Pay for it. And make it really expensive. And then, you know what happens? They say there's no substitute for water. There, of course, is a substitute for water. Of course there's a substitute for water. You know what that substitute is? Technology. You come up with tricks to reuse water or to find other ways to develop solutions, And then by using technology, whether it's drip irrigation or sewage treatment or desalination or my favorite technology that we're not talking about today, but I just want to, so you remember it in 5 years from now. It's a science fiction today as desalination was in 1952. But I actually believe this could be a game changer for the whole world. Where is the most amount of water everywhere? In the air around us. The air, even in this air-conditioned room, the air is saturated with water. And so atmospheric water generation, which again is a huge new industry, put it into sterile tanks, and you can take it out, you can have the purest drinking water imaginable. And there's all kinds of other technology that would be a solution. Okay, I have a question here. Okay, Jurian, maybe pronouncing it if I am, I apologize. Jurian or Jurian or Jurian Middelhoff. Do I have that even close to correct? Who was that? Yeah, pronounce your name for me correctly. Jurian. Okay, fabulous, great. And you are from, and I apologize that I didn't know that you were here earlier, you're from the Embassy of Holland in Panama, which obviously is another great democracy. But it's not only just another great democracy. Holland is the counterpart of Israel in the world in smart water. If Israel is the smartest place in the world in water scarcity and has built a great culture around it, Holland, the Netherlands, is the greatest country in the world in terms of water abundance and what to do about it, but has likewise built a great culture around it. And I think that both Holland and Israel offer many things to learn. And you and I don't know each other. You didn't pay me to say that, but I really want to say that. Okay, so I just, and you have a special, it's the only country in the world that I believe that has a special ambassador who only focuses on global water issues. His name is Henk Ovink. And if he's not been invited to this country, maybe for next year's World Water Day. He's a terrific, great man. Okay. Although I'd like to come back next year if you could have me back. Okay. I'm feeling kind of at home here. I don't want to, And I was told when I came in, there's that big, long boat outside. I was told that if I came a day earlier, there's an 8-hour trip on that boat along the canal. Yeah. Okay, when I come back, that's what I want, okay? We'll do that? Okay, so Mr. Middelhoff asks, as a country that is already active in the water sector in Panama, we, Holland, salute the attention of the Panama Canal for saving water. We also know that there are challenges in Panama. What should be the priority for Panama according to you? Okay, so a lot of those things have been said since you wrote your question. What should be the priority? It's a target-rich environment. There are so many things to fix. Fix public education, fix culture development, fix taxation around paying for water, create water meters, come up with intelligent basis for charging for the water, fix water leaks in the pipes, develop technologies in the canal that takes the 90 million gallons a day, I can't believe that number, find technologies that can capture that water and reuse it and reuse it and reuse it over and over again, which I know is happening now with the new locks, but figure out ways to do that as well. There are lots of things to do here, and I think, again, it'll all come. This may be an exciting day if we look back 5 years from now, where we have a core of extremely smart, motivated people who are eager to make change, and let this day be a starting point for real conversation in Panama about all the great things that can be done. Okay, let's make that happen here. So the answer is, what should be done? Lots of things could be done, and I left out in my list. Storage capacity has to be built. It's almost dumb technology. It's not hard to do. It's just a question of allocating tax dollars and resources to make it happen, to create these holding pens, cover them with plastic so they don't lose anything to evaporation, and turn it into a source of water.
Solar panels better.
Well, yeah, I didn't say that, but
solar panels.
So I didn't say that because I was trying to make my long answer shorter, but the best of all things that I have seen is, this also is an Israeli invention I saw, and I love this. And that is to build these aquifers, to build these reservoirs, not aquifers, to build these reservoirs, and to have them covered with vinyl sheeting and embed on the top of the plastic photovoltaic cells, not the kind of big ones that are on top of, big buildings, but these tiny little cells. I don't know if any of you have ever seen this. I don't have a slide here with me, but I could show you what it looks like. It's amazing. And you cover the whole reservoir with this. And then it does two things. First, the sheeting prevents any evaporation. Second of all, the photovoltaic cells are picking up the solar rays, and it then becomes a net exporter of energy. And then you can plant these in areas around farms because of the fact that helps subsistence farmers grow out of dire poverty. That's a global problem, not just a Panama problem. And you can give farmers energy to use so they can electrify their homes. Their children can start having reading lights so they can read at night. You can have plumbing, indoor plumbing. You can have modern homes because you have lots of energy sources. You can have lots of energy for your farm, and you can have lots of water as well. So it has a virtuous circle, again, for agriculture, for the economy, for human happiness.
Gracias, Dr. Seth.
Thank you, Dr. Seth. We thank you for the questions, and we thank you, Doctor. Thank you for your answers, Doctor. Thank you for being here, and thank you, the Director and the Vice President, the Vice Director. If you could step over here, Doctor, please. Before we end, let me remind you all, or inform you all, that the International Association of Engineering and Investigation of the Environment is organizing its 33rd World Congress, and it will be here in Panama City. And the principal players of the entire world will be here on a topic of water, connecting the world. This will be from the 1st to the 6th of September of this year. There is the bulletin. That's the address of their Congress, of their website, where you will be able to see that information. Because it's a crucial topic for the Panama Canal, the administrator, Mr. Jorge Luis Quijano, is part of the Directors Committee of that Congress, with other personalities, as well as the Vice President of Water and Environment, Carlos Vargas, with Dr. Lucas Calvo from the Technological University of Panama, who will be the President of the Scientific Committee. The local scientific committee. We invite you to see the promotional message of this Congress. And you will also be able to see it online at the address we already mentioned. Let's see the spot.
For Hydro-Environment Engineering and Research, IAHR, and the World Congress Local Organizing Committee, we are delighted to invite you to our 38th World Congress in Panama City. The Congress Central theme will be Water, Connecting the World, which will be focused on hydraulic structure, port and coastal engineering, hydro-environment, water management and hydroinformatics, river and sediment management, and climate change and extreme events. Our Congress will provide the platform for science and practice to come together. Workshops and training events will be offered. At the same time, an exhibition will show the latest advances in equipment, software, and instrumentation. I'll see you in the 38th IAHR World Congress in Panama in 2019.
Now you know, from the 1st to 6th of September, here in the city of Panama. With this, we conclude this wonderful Congress that was given by Seth Siegel, celebrating the World Water Day. Doors, and those that are in the back, please go through the back. And please finish the coffee break outside also.